This lecture is over stream of consciousness. It also includes information about modern innovation in writing, Virginia Woolf and her novel, Mrs. Dalloway. For stream of consciousness as a technique in literature, it's a style of narration meant to mimic the flow of human thought. We'll talk more in a minute about where the catalyst for this inventive way of writing came from. If you think about the way that you think, which is called metacognition, by the way, the human brain, when it thinks, it doesn't divide things into chapters or into sentences. Often your thoughts are incomplete or fragmented, or you jump to your sister's rabbit who one time bit your finger, which reminds you of the dentist, and when you bit the dentist's finger when you were younger, or your brain just goes all these different directions. At least mine does. The human thought process flows, and authors try to mimic the way humans loosely associate when jumping from thought to thought. This is a contrast to traditional narration, where you have a third or first person narrator who is telling what happened, whether it's in an emotional way or it's in an objective way or whatever. Often you would get a character's perspective on the stage through a soliloquy. In a soliloquy, the speaker addresses the audience or some absent third person so that we can know what the speaker is thinking even though no one else is on stage. Stream of consciousness, then, is primarily the character addressing the character's self. It's like a soliloquy, except the third person is the reader instead of the audience, and the character is not actually saying the words as they would in a play with a soliloquy. We see the inside of the character's mind, and it has little structure. It can jump from place to place, whereas with a soliloquy, you're usually going to get a logical sequence with complete sentences and beautiful words, lots of literary devices, whereas the human mind doesn't really work like that. Primarily, this technique is used in fiction instead of drama or poetry, though it is used in poetry to a degree after, say, 1920 or so. Often, this technique of stream of consciousness is also lacking in punctuation or traditional grammatical structure. Sentences can be whole pages long or more, whereas what we see in more traditional works, whereas it follows a traditional structure and pattern of grammar. Now, stream of consciousness is often used interchangeably with the term interior monologue. An interior monologue performs the functions of stream of consciousness in a more organized way. An interior monologue is going to be more structured. We see the character's thoughts in stream of consciousness, and they may still be disjointed in an interior monologue or make these associative leaps. However, inner monologue will maintain the syntax, the punctuation. Often it'll be a more comfortable narration, whereas stream of consciousness might make you stop and think. Maybe you have to reread some of the stuff because you're reading someone else's thoughts and they're not going to think like you necessarily. These terms, though, still are used interchangeably, and some consider like stream of consciousness as the genre, while interior monologue is the delivery of stream of consciousness, because inherently stream of consciousness is the interior speech in someone's brain. So it is, by definition, an interior monologue. Now, this innovation, these things in writing, when the whole scope of writing changes, these things don't happen by accident. These come from talented authors or new authors or interested authors purposefully seeking to change the craft. Woolf and her contemporaries, Virginia Woolf, we're going to talk more about her in a minute, they wanted their work to reflect life. They wanted authenticity. They wanted to mirror the universal human experience. Previously, characters and books had been written for the upper classes, or they had been made for tragedy. We talk about you have to be of noble blood, because you have a long way to fall. Whereas with what Woolf was trying to do, what her group was trying to do, is to make it accessible, to make it literature relatable to everyone. Also, we have to consider that she's writing in between the world wars. World War I was unlike anything England or America or anyone had ever seen before. And it changed how people lived, how they saw the world, what they thought of as important and valuable and possible. And because literature is fundamentally a reflection of the human experience, literature had to change too. Because the human experience changed while we still maintain the same feelings and understandings that we have as a culture, for thousands of years, um, the way, the avenue, the vessel had to change because the World War changed things so much. Now, Woolf herself was born in 1882, post Civil War in America. She's born in England. Her two most famous works are Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse. She was part of the Bloomsbury Group, which is this group of authors living in England who are working together to be innovative and as creative as possible. Woolf is considered one of the most influential modern writers. She was prolific in her writing, even when she was suffering from these nervous episodes or breakdowns. She still would write. Her social life would suffer, but she would write and write and write. She married in 1912. She had an extremely happy marriage. Her husband Leonard was a writer in the Bloomsbury Group, and they set up their own publishing house. So a lot of her works were published by herself and her husband in their home. She was a feminist, and she believed in, how to say, she believed that often men's narcissism and repression is what caused women to have these nervous episodes in the first place. Finally, she died in 1941 by committing suicide. She put rocks in her pockets, got in the river, and drowned herself. She wrote a letter to her husband, and she felt that, she says, she didn't want him to have to suffer because she was ill. She wanted him to be able to live and to work without having to worry about her. This was not her first suicide attempt, and she addresses suicide in Mrs. Dalloway. Now, Woolf's innovation comes from her experimentation with storytelling. For example, Mrs. Dalloway is a woman's whole life kind of explained within the confines of a single day. Starts out in the morning, ends in the evening, but this whole time we're getting images out of Clarissa's brain. There's another story that she wrote that takes place 2 days that are 10 years apart, and it tells the story in kind of the same way as Mrs. Dalloway, where in real time we have a very small amount of time. But in brain time, we see memories, flashbacks, feelings triggered by events. She wrote a book-length essay discussing a woman's needs in writing fiction called A Room of One's Own. And she uses stream of consciousness and inner monologue in all of these works that she's trying to be innovative in, trying to do something different with fiction. Now, Mrs. Dalloway is her most well-known novel, and it's about Clarissa Dalloway's preparations for a party that she's giving that evening. Clarissa Dalloway is in her mid-50s. She's in society, well-to-do, very wealthy. Her husband's in Parliament. And throughout this day, as she's preparing for the party, she has various memories of flashbacks of her life, choices she regrets or wasn't able to make because if you watch the Importance of Being Earnest video that I did, it talks about how homosexuality is literally illegal in the late 1800s in England. And so, although Mrs. Dalloway is taking place in the interwar years, that's still a taboo. I mean, even today to an extent, homosexuality is a taboo, depending on where you are, what company you're in. And the whole novel takes place within a single day. It also deals with another issue that was confronting the world at this time, post-traumatic stress disorder. After World War I, when men came back from the war, a lot of them were really messed up by what they saw, what they did, what they experienced. And Septimus Warren Smith in Mrs. Dalloway is one character who is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Some things to look for as you read. Look at Woolf's style. Does Clarissa's stream of thought match the rhythm of your own? When you read Clarissa's thoughts, I think, all of life kind of has this rhythm, which is sort of weird to say maybe, but Clarissa too has a rhythm in her thoughts. Look at it, read it out loud, feel what she's feeling. Also, the story is told in a third person point of view. Is Wolf's third person recreation of Clarissa's thought, does it feel authentic? Or is it, you feel, does Clarissa feel real or does she feel manufactured? Does Septimus feel real or does he feel manufactured? And whether they feel real to you or not, what is it in the style and the writing that makes them feel authentic or inauthentic? And also, what moves does Wolf make within the text so you'll see Clarissa as human, as real, as Virginia Woolf saw Clarissa Dalloway? What is she trying to show us with Clarissa's thoughts? I hope you've enjoyed the lecture, and I hope you enjoy Mrs. Dalloway. It's one of my favorites.